This is the first thing people think of when they hear India.
So on my left and right, you'll see a bunch of shacks, just trash everywhere.
What is the dirtiest country in the world?
India.
And as an Indian, it sucks. Not only because it makes us look bad, but also because it's true. We can't escape it. It is a part of us. It is us. But what if I told you India was not always like this? When we read ancient foreign accounts, India was not a spectacularly polluted place. In fact, many travelers describe it as cleaner than their homelands. While Indians bathed daily, Europeans only bathed a few times a year during the colonial era. So that brings us to this contradiction. How did India go from this to this? And even more importantly, can Indians actually solve today's calamitous pollution crisis? This is what we'll find out today in a story of how a civilization that exalted purity succumbed to its own filth. So let's start with the elephants in the room that everyone likes to blame for India's pollution crisis: colonialism and caste. Now, colonialism was indeed catastrophic for India. Before colonization, India accounted for roughly a quarter of global GDP. But by the time the British left, it plummeted to 4%. This was caused by contrasting forces. While Great Britain birthed the Industrial Revolution, they systematically prevented the subcontinent from industrializing itself. Historian Will Durant writes how the British used tariffs to crush domestic Indian textile manufacturing and other industries, forcing the country to recede back into agricultural pursuits. And on top of that, they decimated the farmers themselves with even more taxes and restrictions. The Indian economy couldn't create that value add we see in developed or manufacturing economies because of the stranglehold of the Raj. And as a result, extreme poverty nearly doubled during British rule, from 23% in 1810 to 50% at India's independence. I can keep going on about stats about how the British Empire was bad, but here's where I need to tell you an uncomfortable truth. It's all cope. If you look at a lot of the paintings or even archival footage from British India, cities and towns are fairly clean. More clean than modern India in many cases. Now, some people will push back that a lot of this was due to these places having European quarters and how the British used sanitation drives to justify demolitions and social control. That's true. But even the princely states or villages with more autonomy were quite clean as well. Credit to those Indians, actually. Princes like those of Baroda and Mysore created sanitary departments and city improvement trusts to enforce cleanliness. So we can't pin all this on colonialism. Now let's address the other elephant in the room: caste. The common explanation is that Indians don't care about common spaces or even each other because they're divided by caste. The thought basically goes, why should I care about that part of town? It has nothing to do with my caste. I only care about my caste quarters. And I understand where this idea is coming from. It is logical. But the thing is, history proves it completely wrong. Now, I've gone through thousands of ancient foreign accounts, at this point via a series called The India They Saw. Strongly recommend you guys read it. And whether it's the Greek Megasthenes or the Chinese Fashion or the Berber Ibn Battuta, none of them did the classic foreigner observation of India today where they look around and wonder, why is there garbage and pollution everywhere? In fact, a lot of them were actually surprised by how wondrous and rich and high-minded India was. Hell, even a British painter, William Hodges, who came with the East India Company, notes that Indians were exceptionally clean, even in the villages. Yes, I mean an employee on the literal payroll of colonizers is telling you that pre-colonial India was cleaner than England. This is a really crazy motherfucker at this point. And we haven't even gotten to indigenous Indian ideas about cleanliness. In the ancient Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, one of the pillars of yogic discipline was shaucha, or purity. Various scriptures mandate daily bathing, with the Padma Purana claiming that one who does not bathe in the morning is a sinner fit to suffer. So to summarize, a civilization that mandated daily bathing as religious law, that foreign observers described as wealthy and well-ordered for over 2,000 years, this civilization's pollution crisis, it cannot be ancient. It has to be modern. But here's where I'll level with you. Colonialism and caste do hold a piece of the puzzle. The link with colonialism is direct. It caused massive poverty. More poverty, more pollution. But caste is something more subtle. For millennia, caste by itself didn't make Indians build mountains of trash on the streets. What it did was plant a seed. It created a lack of a concept of commons, of a united society owning something between them, something they were all responsible for. So what watered that seed and made it into a plant of pollution? What force capitalized on that plane of poverty? It's ironically something that was good for India. It's freedom. Here's how freedom made India filthy. Look at this diagram. It's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow believed that humans needed to fulfill one set of needs before moving higher up the pyramid to fulfill others. From physical needs, to safety, to love, to self-esteem, to self-actualization. Now this was made for individuals, but let's apply it to Indian society. As we pointed out earlier, India was dirt poor at independence. Not just that, but India was partitioned on religious lines. While Pakistan became an Islamic state and cleansed its non-Muslim population, India chose secularism. That meant India had to manage the fallout between various communities and try to build a state, an economy, and of course, a united Indian society. That is extremely difficult, and had to do all this being in the throes of poverty. Yet we cannot solely blame the British for this. At the Republic's onset, India embraced something called Fabian socialism. This ideology was en vogue amongst decolonizing countries as capitalism was simply seen as an extension of colonialism. Now that's not necessarily true, but one can empathize with this viewpoint, considering how rapacious colonialism was and the overlap of the colonial administration with capitalist entities like the East India Company. However, even the father of Marxism, Karl Marx, realized an iron truth here. Capitalism must come before socialism. Without capital and wealth, there's nothing to redistribute for socialism. Thus, India didn't even progress to capitalism. It rotted in feudalism, where agricultural extraction eclipsed wealth and innovation. This dynamic prevented India from growing or industrializing. So instead, India would languish and remain in poverty. Indians remained at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, and naturally with more poverty and more pollution. But that's not the whole story. Poverty cannot explain it all. Other countries like China and Singapore were also poor and polluted, yet they radically transformed their level of societal cleanliness. The big difference is something that has a great reputation, and I think deservedly so. The difference is democracy. Now, India embraced full democracy very early, just 3 years after independence. This meant every man and woman, every individual from every community had an equal vote. Now the thing is, India's democracy has a distortion to it: diversity. As not just a country, but civilization, India is extremely diverse. Thousands of castes, hundreds of languages, every single religion in the world was present in India. But people would not vote as individuals or on issues like development. They voted on community lines and for the freebies that socialism promised. Let's dial into that concept of commons we discussed earlier. When people are poor and the state is weak, their social security is primarily their community. So voting on community lines has tangible benefits. Your casteman will favor you if in power. He'll cut some more welfare for you, defend you against riots. Hell, even beyond politics, caste and community gave people rituals and traditions that mattered. Caste was akin to ethnicity. So in democracy, Indians retreated into their community rather than embracing unity. This meant common areas, common infrastructure, common markets were not the priority for Indians. The priority was the spaces, infrastructure, and markets of one's community. You'll even notice this inside Indian houses, which are fairly clean and hygienic, but step outside into the streets and it looks like a literal war zone. And part of that is because Indians now began living in mixed developments next to people of different communities. And with no concept of commons, why would they care what's outside their homes? So that brings us to the question: why doesn't India just copy Singapore, China, and other countries that escaped poverty and pollution? These countries use law and order to crack down on pollution. So why can't India? Here's a messed up part that we have to explore next. If the government cracks down on pollution, there's a good chance that they're going to lose elections. So let's dive deeper into Indian democracy to understand this phenomenon. Okay, so I have to admit, when I landed in Mumbai, I was a total tourist. I told my driver to go to the main attraction with my fellow Firangis, the world's largest slum, Dharavi. Now, Dharavi is important not just because of this world record, but what it tells us about India's relationship with poverty, pollution, and also democracy. Dharavi has been the target of redevelopment since 1985. Yeah, that's 40 years, dog. Back then, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi allocated 100 crore rupees for Mumbai's redevelopment, with a significant chunk specifically for Dharavi's upliftment. It clearly didn't work. So in 2000, the state government created a redevelopment board. This also completely failed for nearly 2 decades. Real redevelopment only started happening a couple years back when billionaire Gautam Adani's company was awarded the rights for Dharavi's redevelopment. But progress is still slow, and the redevelopment is controversial. The core question here is, why has it taken decades for the Indian government to clear this slum, this epitome of Indian filth, the subject of movies and straight-up poverty pornography that foreigners pay to go on tours of just to see how dirty it is? Well, let's peel back to my trip and see what I learned from locals. Pushback against Dharavi's redevelopment comes from a few different places. Let's start off with the most surprising: economics. The Indian government is giving Dharavi residents a free flat to relocate to, which is usually bigger and more clean than their current living quarters. But many residents don't want a flat. In fact, when they're actually given that flat, they usually rent it out and just go back living in their place in Dharavi. Why is this? Well, Dharavi is more than just a dirty place in the middle of Mumbai. It is a market. Specifically, Dharavi has 5 main industries: leatherworking, earthen pottery, sweets, quick tiffin food for workers, and the infamous scrap, which is sold off for recycling. Dharavi's redevelopment is a threat to these local industries as they've grown organically in different quarters of the slum. These mini bazaars, workshops, and storage places are apparently not figuring into current plans for redevelopment, which is why many locals are resistant to it. This is actually the most understandable aspect. The other is an element that is darker and goes to the heart of Indian politics. A couple years ago, I wrote about this thing which I call Izzatism. And no, it's not that whole white supremacist isn't meme going on these days. Izzatism is the phenomenon where Indians block policies by claiming that their identity or honor is being attacked. It sounds weird, but let's go through some examples. Many times you'll see these crazy NGO types complain that the redevelopment of Dharavi is Islamophobic or casteist or other unrelated identitarian bigotries just because Dharavi has a higher number of Muslims or certain castes or whatever identity they want to point out. The thing is, many people do actually latch onto it, and it causes them to entrench their positions of being against development. This sounds insane, but it happens across India. In Punjab, farmers burn excess crops at the end of harvest season, which causes gargantuan levels of smog that suffocate neighboring areas like Delhi. When the government tries to crack down on such practices, the farmers claim that the government is being anti-Punjabi or against their caste or even against the Sikh religion, when none of this has anything to do with caste or ethnicity or religion. Another case. In the sacred city of Varanasi, redevelopment of infamously disgusting streets and shamefully polluted holy areas has garnered pushback from locals, claiming their honor, their izzat, is being insulted and that the soul of Varanasi is being destroyed. Some even accuse the government of being against their caste. And in all these scenarios, Dharavi, Punjab, Varanasi, and beyond, the locals threaten to vote for the opposition if development and anti-pollution efforts are not stopped. I have to stop and say, goddamn, India can be super frustrating and infuriating at times, but that's also what makes it so interesting. Like here you could see that even when India's politicians try to enforce the law, when they try to literally clean India up, it's Indian society itself that pushes back. And it's this type of diverse democratic dynamic that authoritarian countries like China, single-party city-states like Singapore, or any developed democracies do not have to face. India, Indian society, and Indian democracy are playing on hard mode. So is there any hope, or is India doomed to be the dump of the world? Well, there is a glimmer. A city that used to be infamous for rat-filled plagues was recently crowned as India's cleanest city. And it's here where we have some real lessons on doing India right. In the 1980s, my parents moved to a small city in the West Indian state of Gujarat called Surat. Back then, it was just starting to boom. Jobs were flowing in, Surat's diamond and textile industries were taking off, The city was shining on the coast of the Arabian Sea, but the infrastructure and governance couldn't keep up with the city's population growth. Overcrowding and open sewers began to define the city. My parents told me that they remember rats the size of cats scurrying around the streets and sometimes even in their house. Surat was becoming one of India's most polluted cities, and it all came to a head in 1994. Monsoon flooding caused the open sewers to overflow, and not just with waste, but also the bodies of dead rats that lived in its depths. This caused an outbreak of the pneumonic plague. The news of this plague spread like wildfire, not just through word of mouth, but also through the Indian media who worsened the mania. This caused 300,000 people to flee Surat, the largest exodus in India since the Kashmiri Hindu exodus of 1990. The irony, only 56 people died in this plague. And it's actually this contradiction of 56 deaths versus 300,000 people leaving where we first see the shimmer of a clean Surat. One of the reasons the death toll was so low was not only because of the migration, but also the quick actions of the state government. Paramilitary enforced quarantine while the state government rushed antibiotics to combat the plague. Nonetheless, Surat as a whole suffered greatly in economic terms. The migration out and lockdown caused $600 million in losses, a mammoth amount for a third world city. A burgeoning commercial center now became a backwater. So the government of Surat brought someone in to fix the city and unlock its great potential. His name was S.R. Rao, or Rao Sahib as he came to be known. Rao Sahib was tasked with cleaning up the city, literally. When Rao first met his staff, they complained that the problem was genetic. They noted how they'd send workers to clean streets at 9 p.m., and by 10 p.m., the people would have just made a new garbage pile. So Rao went to these places personally. He waded in the garbage and sludge piles with his own feet to make a point to society. He would call his officials to clean the mess while he watched. But this type of individual signaling and surveillance can't clean an entire city, even if Rao was leading from the front. To learn how Rao succeeded, we have to look at this chart. You can see how China and the US have a lot more local government employees versus India, who concentrates more power at the center and especially state level. This imbalance causes a lower level of accountability. While the center tends to national interests, state governments in India are frequently the biggest dens of corruption and inefficiency. This causes the understaffed and stretched local officials to be reduced to equally corrupt and/or overworked pawns. So what Rao did was place more emphasis on local governance. He created something he called the 6x6x6 system. Rao divided Surat into 6 zones. Each zone had 6 districts. Crucially, each zone leader was empowered with more executive authority, so they could make quicker decisions so that those under them in their 6 districts could execute faster as well. Rao introduced a redressal system for reporting to district authorities so they could respond quickly. He bent bureaucratic levers to introduce an administrative charge for nuisance, basically a fine for loitering. Later, the city was equipped with CCTVs that link license plates to owners, so if someone throws litter out of the car, they get fined. Solid waste removal went from 35% to 95% during his tenure. Disease rates went down 70%. And soon Surat was being labeled the cleanest city in India. So now consider this. Why did that factor we talked about earlier, Izzatism, not cause an electoral backlash here? While Rao was a bureaucrat, so not a politician, if the people got angry enough, they could goad politicians into transferring him. But they didn't. And the reason ties back to the plague. The damage it caused in Surat affected everyone. Hindu, Muslim, upper caste, lower caste, legit everyone. This crisis made the city realize they had to change, that they had to stop politics over petty identity honor battles and instead elevate priorities like combating pollution. And that kind of sucks. The reason I'm saying it sucks is because it takes a massive crisis for Indians to change. Does that mean we should send a plague to every Indian city? I don't think so, but when I scroll the internet today, some people seem to have that idea. I mean, anti-Indian sentiment is kind of off the rails nowadays. But let's rest with that sentiment for a second. What if it is that anti-Indian sentiment that may just be the crisis that spurs change for Indians? What if the internet could make India clean? In 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched one of the most ambitious cleanliness campaigns in human history, Swachh Bharat, or Clean India, a national mission to transform India's relationship with not just pollution, but also human hygiene. The government built over 100 million toilets, They ran awareness campaigns. They even got Bollywood involved. They made cleanliness a matter of national pride. But the thing is, it failed. While infrastructure improved, people's behavior didn't. When all of India was given toilet coverage, many people still wanted to defecate in the open. The central government tried to push cleaning drives, but state and local governments didn't follow through. And while some did try to clean their streets, more kept polluting them. India's pollution is as much a cultural problem as it is a policy problem. So let's come back to Maslow. At independence, over 50% of Indians lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's below 5%. 390 million people lifted out of poverty in a single generation. That's more than the entire population of the United States. Indians are racing up Maslow's pyramid now. And as survival becomes less of a daily crisis, something else starts to matter. Self-esteem. How the world sees you. How you see yourself. 32 million Indians traveled abroad in 2025, and hundreds of millions more are seeing the world through their phones. And it's not just Tokyo and London they're comparing themselves to anymore. It's Nairobi, Hanoi, Medellin, cities that were synonymous with chaos and poverty a generation ago, now beating Indian metros on basic cleanliness. So when young Indians see this, something cracks. This searing hot shame is going viral within India. And shame, like the plague, is indiscriminate. Indians being insulted for their pollution doesn't target people by religion, caste, or ethnicity. It lands on all Indians simultaneously. That is a commons. And for the first time, it's being forced on us whether we like it or not. Recall that the Surat plague created a shared crisis that dissolved Izzatism long enough for Rao to do his work. Now the internet is also spreading a plague. That not just of anti-Indian sentiment, but the truth of India's reality, of its inadequacy, of its shortcomings, of its broken potential. So what should Indians do with all this shame? Because we are, and I say this as an Indian myself, a race of world-class complainers. We think that whining is wisdom, that being cynical is like the ultimate expression of intelligence, that expressing the same loser think, that our parents, our uncles, our aunties, our dadas, our daddies, our bhais, our bens, everyone says the same thing in a pathetically scornful and sarcastic way that some people think makes us rebellious or innovative in our thought. My friend Samyak really hit me with a zinger when he told me this, that every complaint Indians make about India now is nothing different than what Indians 20, 50, 100, 200 years ago made. There's nothing new about this at all. What India needs is more Rao Sahibs. It needs more Afroz Shahs who organize cleanups of Mumbai's beaches. It needs more Abdul Kalams who dare to dream. It needs more leaders who do not look away at India's shame and instead urge its citizens to overcome it. It needs more average Indians who are willing to make a difference, to speak up, to sacrifice. Because the question was never whether India could be clean. Surat and India's past have answered that. The question is whether enough Indians are done whining and ready to do the work.